Good morning. I think we'll get started here pretty soon. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, everybody's awake. That's good. Well, welcome. Welcome to the annual meeting of the Nonprofit Association of Oregon. My name is Chris Crank, and I'm the current president of the board of directors. And some of you may know me as former CEO of Albertina Kerr, a nonprofit based in Portland, and I retired at the end of June. Although I was saying over here I'm not retiring, that's a bad word. That sounds very passive, and my cousin, who has a place in Argentina, in Argentina they call it jubilación, which is jubilating, right? So I figure that jubilating is a lot more fun than retiring, so that's what I'm doing. I was really privileged to be a part of Albertina Kerr, and I'm proud that Albertina Kerr was actually a charter member of NAO. It's also been a privilege to serve on the board, and I'm honored to be with you all today and excited to tell you what we've accomplished at NAO this year. During my tenure on the board, which is the same tenure as our current executive director, I've seen some great shifts happening at NAO, which I believe are helping make us a better organization and also help make Oregon and the nonprofits serving our great state stronger and more vital. Within the last 2 years, our membership has nearly doubled. Today I just got an updated figure from Amy, we are over 1,281 members strong. But it's not really enough to track the numbers of members that have joined NAO. We also have to think of our network in terms of the amount of social service benefits provided to Oregon, the number of jobs created by nonprofits, and the positive impact of these social purpose businesses on our overall economy from Astoria to Ontario. I've been working closely with Executive Director Jim White and with our Board of Directors to help us learn what to track and how to be more responsive to our members, to help us increase our positive impact on the sector. I'm pleased to say the organizational dashboarding we are engaged in will help improve our ability to meet the demands of foundational issues that nonprofits often are challenged by. In addition, we see our role as also being able to nimbly address and shift toward trends that we are seeing in the sector, allowing us at NAO to be a resource to as many of you as possible. At this point, I'd like to take a moment to mention the support of our sponsors for our programming in general and the annual meeting and High Desert Conference, which directly follows our annual meeting. We hope that you will stay and attend the conference. So the sponsors I would like to acknowledge. I want to thank Kaiser Permanente for both financial support and also for the flashlights each of you have on the table. If you haven't had a chance to open them up, they're really cool. So thank you, Kaiser Permanente. I want to also call out Bliss Sequoia Insurance. You can check out their vendor booth for more information about their D&O insurance product as offered as a member benefit. Next, GiveGab, an online giving portal helping with hashtag Oregon's Give campaign and sponsor of the Northwest Nonprofit Capacity Report. They also have a vendor booth. Also want to acknowledge Central Oregon Community College, who is excited to be offering their space for nonprofit events, so check them out as well. Heffernan Insurance, great partners with NAO through workshops and insurance products. They also have a vendor booth. First Nonprofit Group, who also has a booth, and you can check out their services. Nonstop Administration and Insurance Services, also can check them out. Cambia Health Solutions, and the list goes on, hang on. And Miller Nash Graham Dunn, legal firm based in Portland. So if you give a round of applause to all those folks, we appreciate their support. We'd also like to thank our foundations, corporate sponsors, and supporters, in-kind groups that have helped throughout the year of 2016. And now I'd like to introduce our current Vice President and presumptive Board President, Nancy Ramirez Arriaga. Nancy was going to be with us to introduce our keynoter today, but due to unforeseen circumstances beyond her control, she can't be here today. Nancy has served the nonprofit sector for over 16 years in various capacities, including strategist, director, advisor, consultant, board member, and vice president for the past 3 years. I'm proud to say that my fellow NAO board members will be voting later this morning to transition my role to Nancy as NAO's board president. Nancy will become the first person of color and the youngest to serve as NAO board president in the 40-year history of NAO and its prior iteration as TACS, Technical Assistance to Community Services. There's Nancy's picture. I'm looking at it myself there. There she is. While we're proud of Nancy's role in leading our organization, we are also humbled at the work that we still need to do to ensure that our organization is learning with and from leaders from diverse backgrounds to strengthen the way we think about and serve the sector. So please join me in absentia giving a round of applause to Nancy. She's actually with her new grandbaby. So at this point, I want to introduce Jen Rusk, member of the board of directors, who has some comments and is from this neck of the woods. So welcome, Jen.
So I'm not used to speaking in front of microphones, so let me know if I'm too close and too loud. I want to first of all just welcome everybody this morning to Central Oregon, to the NAO annual conference and the annual meeting. I'm going to say a few words on behalf of Nancy. Let's see. So my name is Nancy Arriaga. I'm also proud to serve as a board member for NAO. I too have seen a lot of changes in NAO during my tenure on the board. I've seen an organization work hard to shift from a management service organization with a 40-year history of providing consulting and training to nonprofits to the membership-based state association serving nonprofits across Oregon. We're a growing network, as Chris mentioned, but we're growing in ways that Oregon is currently, but are we growing in ways that Oregon is currently growing? Our state has changed and our leadership is expanding. According to the 2015 Oregon Census, 4,028,977 people live in Oregon. 87.6 are classified as white, 2.1 are black, and 12.7 are classified as Latino. Although a study produced in partnership with a coalition of communities of color in Portland State indicates that due to undercounting, these numbers are actually most likely larger than reported. The Oregon Community Foundation recently published a report called Latinos in Oregon, Trends and Opportunities in a Changing State. Oregon's Latino population is young, diverse, and growing. Since 2000, it has actually grown by 72%. Additionally, according to a national report by the D5 Coalition, in 2022, the workforce will be comprised of 38% more Hispanics, 24% more Asians, and 10% more African Americans. This same study also reports that over 37 million Americans, 12% of the population, are disabled. Does the leadership of our nonprofit sector in Oregon represent that same diversity and growth? The shifting demographics in the nation and in Oregon inspire me to continue looking for opportunities to work together to address issues in need and explore the depths of opportunity in all communities of Oregon. In my role at NAO, I will challenge us to ensure all voices are represented through membership and across our charitable sector, to reflect our values throughout all of our decisions, services, advocacy efforts, and to continue on our path as a learning organization to best serve the sector. I'm also proud to say that the NAO Board is committed to leading with excellence and ensuring that we are taking steps to meet the full needs of Oregon's diverse nonprofits. Equity, diversity, and inclusion can't be moved on commitment alone. We must allocate resources, and our board has done this. We're investing in our learning to ensure that board and staff have a strong foundation with a common language and framework to advance equity. To support this on this journey of self-exploration and change, we are leaning on the expertise of Hanif Fazal, the Executive Director of the Center for Equity and Inclusion. The Center for Equity and Inclusion's mission is to advance equity and eliminate disparities through a holistic approach to transform personal and professional communities. Their approach is focused on raising consciousness and building tools that equip individuals, schools, and organizations to build more inclusive communities. They provide comprehensive programming, targeted consulting, and training, regionally and nationally, for those interested in working together to urgently advance equity and inclusion within their institutions and communities. Hanif has spent over 20 years addressing issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. For 7 of those years, he worked with a nonprofit organization to help lead a transformative process to advance equity and inclusion across all aspects of the organization. He also worked regionally, nationally, and internationally with numerous organizations across the fields of education, philanthropy, for-profit, and nonprofit sectors, helping them to plan and strategically advance equity and inclusion efforts, training programs for educators, social workers, and diversity officers, and facilitators. He's the founder of the Step Up program, a nationally and locally recognized program that serves over 350 disadvantaged students yearly across Portland Public School District. And he co-founded Open School East, a 7th to 12th grade school program that serves students across 5 school districts, and also of the Equity Certificate Program, which is a collaborative education initiative providing intensive professional development focused on equity and inclusion to educators across multiple school districts. Please join me in welcoming Hanif Fazal.
Good morning. I'll try that one more time. Good morning. There we go. There we go. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you this morning about an issue that definitely seems pressing and important, not just to us individually as nonprofits or even as a system of nonprofits, but as we turn on our TV and news every single day. Seems to be a more pressing and urgent issue that we seemingly have a very difficult time to address as a country. So certainly this conversation is timely. So let me just start with a brief introduction of myself and talk a little bit about my hopes for just our conversation today, and we'll kind of get into it. My name is Hanif Fazal. It's a Muslim name. My father was born in Tanzania, Africa. He's Indian and immigrated to the United States, Chicago. My mom's full Mexican, and they met in Chicago actually on a dating service, believe it or not. He tells me she was on his birthday, the 3rd one on the list. I didn't even know. I was like, Dad, back then there was dating services, huh? This is interesting. So I don't know if that's like a dad tale or if it actually happened, but my mom seemed to confirm it. So they met in Chicago, and that's where I was born. I spent most of my life, though. I moved out from Chicago to the Portland metro area when I was about 3 years old, and I've lived most of my life in that area. So a little while back, we decided to found an organization called the Center for Equity and Inclusion, and we did so for a couple of reasons. One, there was a obvious passion around these issues, but 2, we had the idea that in order to really address issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, that we needed a more comprehensive approach to doing so. And as we looked around, we saw that there weren't really a lot of resources for organizations who were really wanting to invest in this kind of work to do it in that kind of manner. And so since the inception of the center, we've had the opportunity to work with organizations locally and nationally on a more comprehensive approach, which really more or less means a couple of things. One, we're helping organizations build what we call critical consciousness, helping them build common language, a common framework, a common understanding of equity, diversity, and inclusion, enough consciousness and connection to the issues that they're actually building real passion and will to address these organizations, not just as they arise, but in a really sustainable, long-term kind of manner. We also know that for a long time, this is where the conversation in this work stopped. So we would have great conversations about diversity or equity and inclusion or whatever the new name around it is, and it then would stop, and there wouldn't really be anything to help organizations figure out, okay, how do I take this conversation and actually make it real in my organization? And so we knew that part of a comprehensive process meant that we had to spend extended time helping organizations build tools, literally tools and protocols that helped organizations advance the work and make it real. And we also knew, as we engaged in the work, that all of it would be more or less fruitless if we had great conversations, we had tools, but there wasn't actual change happening in the organizations, that it wouldn't all really matter. And so our work also includes with organizations, as part of a process, an entire multiple months helping organizations build a refined equity plan that helps direct the focus and energy of an organization around these issues, helps create clear milestones and outcomes so we can measure whether we're having success or not success. But most importantly, and I think this is one of the key tenets of equity inclusion, that it embeds in the organization an opportunity to continue to learn, right? So much of the work that we do in equity, there's not really a prescribed way to do this, and the issues are really complex and difficult and challenging as we dive deeper into these issues. And so more often than not, what we're wanting is for organizations to meaningfully engage, to push themselves, to try on new perspectives or think about things in more inclusive ways, and continue to learn from that. And so our work has been in that kind of sector. I must admit, when I started the center, I had a lot of nervousness about whether this would actually fly in any kind of way, given the history of this kind of work. In that, traditionally, when organizations wanted to engage in this work, the opportunity was to kind of do a 3-hour diversity training, or maybe a day or two, or a workshop kind of experience, or at worst, kind of an online compliance thing that you have to do, or kind of a check off the box conversation around harassment or that kind of thing. And so I was worried that asking organizations to take a deep dive into very uncharted waters, to ask that they be committed to real organizational change, to be asking them to be willing to personalize in a way that isn't often found in professional settings, to ask them to find relevance in a conversation that oftentimes they didn't find a whole lot of relevance in, didn't really feel like it applied in one way or the other, or engage in a conversation or in a process which there was a lot of misperceptions about, right? Or feeling forced to do this in a lot of different ways. I was very nervous that that was going to turn into a resounding big no interest. I'll keep going with the diversity kind of thing. But to my surprise, it hasn't been such. In a short amount of time, our work has brought us across sectors, from philanthropy to education, from the nonprofit sector to the for-profit sector. It has us working with organizations as small as 10 people, big, and as large as 25,000, both in and out of the state. All of these organizations filled with people who were deeply committed to finding a more meaningful process around these issues. That we're looking for something that more than just was check the box, and recognize that the issue of equity, diversity, inclusion, wherever you stand on it, is more than likely not going to be kind of a passing trend or fad, as we've kind of seen. And organization leaders who wanted to get ahead of the curve. So while folks typically come to us with very open minds, I will say they also come to us with not a lot of experience. One of the things that's kind of part of the problem here is that there's been not a whole lot of formal process around how do you engage in this conversation in any kind of meaningful way. So they come to us with very interesting, very open mind, a lot of curiosity, but also some very interesting kind of questions to kind of start off. And someone once said, "Honey, if you're like the equity therapist." Like, organizations come in and they always start with, I always get this, like, okay, so I need to just make sure things can stay confidential. And we go in, like, yes, and then they proceed to tell me things that I've heard in every organization. And so I get a range of things that come our way. So things that range from, okay, Hanif, I'm really excited. We're gonna write the work that we're doing into a proposal. So what do I say? Right? Or they keep asking me about sustainability and equity. Like, can you tell me like what this means? Can you write some piece for me around sustainability? Often now I'm getting, so I get diversity and inclusion, but now equity, like, what is this? And as yesterday someone said, so I'm running the scope by our board. I'm wondering if it's possible to just leave equity out, and if we could just keep diversity and inclusion in. Maybe through this process we can kind of like slowly build some, connection to that word, but it's kind of a no starter for us if I just go, hey, we're going to build an equity team, and the board doesn't seem to have a really response. So we have interesting conversations with folks as they enter into the conversation, which also range from, I don't feel this has a whole lot of relevance, or I'm unclear about where this has relevance, or I've never actually had a conversation, any kind of in-depth conversation about race. And as a leader of an organization, I'm very worried about how I show up or sit in this conversation. 2 conversations about, does this equity, diversity, inclusion, is it just a code word for just race? And is this what that we're actually talking about? Is a racial agenda? So all of these common questions and many more complex problems that organizations are working through are kind of on our plate every day. And our work with these organizations, on the simple to the complicated to the complex, have given me some really unique insights, which I'm really excited about and looking forward to discussing with you this morning. So as we jump into today, I'm honestly hoping for a discussion, much more than me standing up here for a long time talking to you about equity, diversity, inclusion, which isn't really kind of a principle of equity, diversity, inclusion, just kind of tell you everything and not include you in the conversation. So I do not want to model that horrible experience we all had in college. What we want to do is, I want to first be able to create space where we can kind of acknowledge some of the just differing or disparate definitions we have around equity, diversity, inclusion. Right? So I want to get that on plate. I also recognize, and I don't want to presume people don't know this, it's always kind of touchy ground, that, but I do think it's important that we actually address and begin to look at a common definition of equity, diversity, inclusion, how those things kind of actually play out in an organizational context, so that we can kind of start from a shared place. And finally, and most importantly, I'm hoping to engage in a conversation with you all around the real challenges to advancing this work in any kind of meaningful way, that range from resource to how do I get buy-in to, whatever happens along the way as we try to actually do this in ways that have a sustainable kind of impact on an organization. As much as we want to talk about, and as much as we want to engage in that conversation, I also am looking forward to having a conversation with you all this morning about the generative nature of equity, diversity, inclusion, and what organizations are doing to take advantage of the opportunity equity, diversity, inclusion work actually presents. So most of us come to this conversation from either something happened in the organization, and now we got to kind of do something about it. We feel a big push from our foundation leaders to kind of engage in this conversation. Some of us come at it from kind of a moral obligation or kind of a really passionate place. And most folks come with it still trying to figure out, like, okay, how is this actually a generative conversation, not a liability conversation, not a here's a challenge I've got to work through, but what are the real opportunities we have as organizations to engage this conversation? And I want to create space to talk about how organizations doing this. How are this actually increasing the bottom line? How is this increasing productivity? What does this mean for us as we engage a more diverse organization? We help build a more diverse organization that's reflective of the growing diversity the state's having. So hoping to hit all of that with you today. That's it. So that's all we'll do. It's a small conversation. We also figure out how to solve racism and period in general, and go on from there. So as we jump in, I think before this, as we jump into the conversation, I do think it's really important. We start all work with organizations before we get to, most everybody comes to us and says, okay, we want to move this work. We want to turn into action. I want to be able to do something about this. ASAP, one way or the other. And we actually start our process actually with 3 months of doing nothing, which is frustrating at times for folks that are partnered with us. And part of what we end up doing with organizations is actually just spending time building a connection to this conversation. Actually building personal relevance, personal meaning, having people personally understand where and how these issues apply, and also personally connecting to kind of all the complexities that it brings up. We really believe that you cannot move the work if you don't personally have a commitment to it. And we've seen this again and again and again when there's a lack of commitment to the conversation. We'll address the issues that we kind of have to, but the hard ones, the really challenging ones, we tend to kind of back off of. So part of our work is building that collective will and passion. And as I was driving here, I thought important for me to talk about the issue for me as this plays out in lots of different ways. But one of the ones that came up for me as I was driving here, I was thinking about my sister as I was driving from Portland. And my sister left Portland with my mother. I'm about 10 years older than my sister, and spent with my mom from about 6 years old all the way through high school graduation in a small town called Goldendale, Washington, not far from Dalles and Biggs and all that out there. So she lived on this plot, very large piece of land that was she was renting a trailer. My mom and her were renting a trailer on a very large piece of land out there. And when my mom told me that they were moving out there, I had a variety of reactions, I will say how it was described to me was we're moving. It's Goldendale. It's a small welfare town, as how it was described to me. And I say that because I think the language we use matters. I think how we label spaces matter. I think they have deep impacts on the people who live in those spaces and operate in those spaces. It matters. And so in this predominantly rural white community, my sister attempted to thrive. And as did her peers, and as did the Native American community living on the Yakima Indian Nation reservation not too far from Goldendale. So it was interesting for me. My sister is besides my wife and daughter, my sister is the closest human being to me in my life. And I stayed in touch with my sister over the phone, and when I would visit her, it was just the disparate experience that she was having compared to me at my age, or kids in an urban center, was just apparent constantly. When it came to her education, when it came to access to jobs, when it came to community supports, when it came to extracurricular activities, and so many more was just especially noticeable. What she had exposure to versus what kids literally just 2 hours away had exposure to was amazing. She was also experiencing a lot of racial disparities as she grew up, and trying to navigate as one of the few kids of color with her racial or ethnic background was a constant issue for her, and showed up in all kinds of ways. And I watched and listened to her as she navigated naturally towards the Native American community there, and just watched how both groups, my sister, Native American community, struggled in an environment. And years later, actually, I would be asked to come to Goldendale and work with teachers there, and I would hear from teachers their struggle in trying to figure out how to engage communities that come from very different backgrounds or they didn't have exposure to themselves growing up. So this is an interesting experience, and it just was frustrating at times for me to see someone I was so close to but be so miles away in terms of experiences that we were having growing up. It was also, and I think it's also important to note that the disparities my sister were experiencing was not just rooted in geography, but rather rooted in an intersection of geography with gender, with poverty, with geography, with politics, with many more things, all kind of intersecting to create this experience in Goldendale, Washington for everybody. And I also want to note that while she was having these disparate experiences, she was also having all the amazing experiences you get when you live in small communities. She has friendships that are still intact today. just set of values that she's grown up that are very different than mine in so many ways, and that she holds on to very strong. She still goes up to Goldendale and spends time up there. And so all was not bad. Yet those disparities would have a very profound impact on her life and her Native American friends that she grew up in. The academic and social lack of supports and resources would ultimately have my sister, who graduated second in her class, really struggle as a freshman as she entered into the University of Washington's campus. How you take a small town girl and put her in one of the biggest campuses in the Northwest and watch her struggle. So I watched my sister go from a generally confident, thoughtful, reflective, human being, super smart, to someone who lost confidence in college, dropped out by her second year, and was completely lost. Now, my sister was super fortunate in that she had a very strong family unit that she could lean on. And she did lean on that family unit. And it allowed her to get herself back into college and eventually graduate from Portland State with a master's. But I also, when I think about her experience, I begin to wonder about the rest of her peers and what happened to the peers that didn't have such a strong family infrastructure, whose parents didn't have the fortune of holding on to a job in the way that my mom held on to the job. In talking to my sister, she notes that her boyfriend that she grew up with, who was Native American, has passed away, as has most of her Native American friends that she grew up with at that time. My sister is 35 years old. So I'm sharing these experiences partly because our belief is that when we think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, we have a connection to these issues. Part of our work is to begin to find those connections to issues, and these issues have very profound impacts, very, very profound impacts on the trajectory of the lives in the communities we serve. And I know you know that. I just think it's important to kind of slow ourselves down and connect to the meaning of equity, diversity, and inclusion. That it may not, that it has layers and layers and layers to it. So I wanted to kind of enter into that and begin to build kind of our definite, kind of get a kind of a sense in the room of what equity, diversity, and inclusion is meaning to folks, and kind of jump into a conversation about that with you all. So I thought it might be good to kind of just actually hear from you a little bit. So I promise we're not going to do trust falls or anything like that, or stand in circles, sing songs, or anything like that. But I do think it's important, and I don't want to presume that we all are operating off the same language. So I thought just to start off, we could, and I'm just looking for the, oh, there it is. Thank you. Maybe if you could, with a partner, just at your table, how do you define what is the difference for you between diversity and inclusion? Right, just really quickly, with a partner, the difference between diversity and inclusion. Okay. All right, let's see. We're going to do this because we're going to open up to discussion in a little while. Can I just get two brave souls? Definition. And you know what? We'll give you diversity because diversity is the easy one, right? Let's go with this, the typical definition of diversity right now, which is the range of individual community differences, included but not limited to race, ethnicity, culture, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, social class, and so on, right? As well as when we think about diversity, not just kind of personal identities, but also the skill sets that we bring in, the abilities and characteristics that we bring in. So when we think about, is your organization diverse, it's really like all of it. Do you have extroverted people, introverted people? Do you have this group of folk? That kind of is like the general definition that we kind of hold of diversity. When we think about inclusion, just going to get a couple of folks, and let me just say this. I was in a graduate level classroom in intercultural relations, and no joke, I was in a conversation for like 2 hours on whether you can change your ethnicity. And I was like, huh? I can't, someone was arguing, you can change your ethnicity. I was like, I cannot just say one day, I'm not Mexican. I just can't say it. I even if I want, I guess I could say it, but whether I could be it, right? But they were adamant that if you had grown up in one particular culture area one entire life, but then you, at a young age, moved to a different culture and that kind of stuff, that could make you that ethnicity, right? And what's interesting why I say that is I left that conversation, and this is a graduate level class, and there's people from actually around the world in this conversation that I was in. It actually left me thinking that in this conversation that continues to evolve around language, around what perspectives we're taking in, that there are oftentimes not a whole lot of right answers. There's what we call just working definitions that will more or less change as we continue to engage in this conversation. And so one of the things that, even as we engage here, I think one of the things that equity kind of requires us to do is try on learning, which means I'm kind of out of the box, and learning in it itself means I'm engaging in something that I don't know, right? Which is oftentimes an uncomfortable place for us as leaders in organizations, as people helping other people out. We're often positioned as the people who know, right? One way or the other. We know how to handle a budget, we know how to lead an organization, we know how to help this person get from A to B, we know all these kinds of things. And we are incentivized, our knowing is incentivized. Right? So it's how we get jobs. We have expertise in one way or the other. Well, equity actually requires some expertise or growing expertise. As importantly, it requires all of us to position ourselves as learners, to enter into and be willing to engage in exchange with perspectives that we might not have been before, and get curious about it. Right? So even as we engage today and this morning, I'm hoping we can begin just to norm one of those principles, which is just positioning ourselves as learners and being willing to try on an answer or speak out and not worry about whether you get it completely right. And I will just continue to remind you, if you think you've got it right, more or less, at some point that answer will shift and change or grow. Some things will play pretty same, but certainly not most. So when we get to some folks, maybe just two people, your kind of a working definition of inclusion would be what? Great. Okay. So if you hadn't heard that, it's like creating an environment where people feel like they can be themselves, they feel safe, they can be included, all of that. So it's really environmentally focused. Great. Someone else? Yes. Perfect. I really, both answers I just appreciate. And thank you for speaking up. There's so many organizations. One of the things when they come to us, most always the first place they start is, hey, we're not as diverse as we need to be, and we really need some support diversifying. We want to be more representative of the community we serve, kind of conversation. And we get ourselves in a lot of trouble if that is our starting point, actually. Because what we end up finding is we create exactly what you said. We work hard to bring diversity in, but the environment itself is not necessarily inclusive. So now what you've done is you brought more diverse people. Now you have just a more diverse group of angry folks in your organization, right? And so it's, right, okay, great. Now, and it's kind of exacerbating, right? So it's really important as we begin to think about the nuances of this organization. We can be diverse but not inclusive, right? We can even be inclusive but not diverse. But both really work hand in hand. And so when we think about this idea of inclusion, it's a little bit of both. It's an environment, right, that engages multiple perspectives, differing ideas, individuals from diverse backgrounds, but we do that for a very specific reason, to help define organizational policy, practice, and help shape organizational culture. So if we want an environment where people feel reflected, people feel valued, people feel like they have a voice, we have to include them in what their environment operates like. And traditionally, we just haven't done that at any kind of level. And we'll talk about that in a little while, that what equity, diversity, and inclusion requires us to do. So our belief is in order to create a sense of belonging, you have to have people's voice in letting you know what they need in order to feel a sense of belonging in an organization. So those two really go hand in hand, right? How do I build an environment that engages our stakeholders at all levels, from not just the people within an organization, but even the people we serve, into what they're needing in order for them to thrive or feel a sense of belonging or connection to what we're doing with them. So then brings to this word equity, right? I'm still laughing because when the person said, can we just take this off? I was just like, what do I say to that? And it's a really provocative word for a lot of different reasons. And so just at your tables, I want to do something, because it often, and this is a really pivotal thing when we're doing organizational work, and later on today in the workshop we'll kind of explore this a little more, but there's equity and there's also equality. And these two things oftentimes, these two terms or concepts oftentimes run into each other organization-wide. As we're beginning to think about how do you advance this work, there's this kind of general kind of challenge organizations have. So with deciphering between the two, and then as those two begin to intersect. So at your table, see if you can actually decipher, for you all, what is the difference between equity and equality? Right, go for it. All right. So just for time purposes, because I want to get into some question and answer stuff. We had about 10 minutes where we wanted to jump into question and answer. I just wanted to just get us in this conversation and begin to think about the differences between the two. They have actually really significant policy, protocol, and organizational issues, the difference between the terms. And so let me just do a quick definition and then talk very briefly about how organizations are beginning to integrate it and then open it up to some questions here. So when we think about equity, I think the important thing to think about is maybe just a starting point with equality. So when we think about operating in equality, we think about equality values what we call equal inputs. So everybody gets the same number of resource, time, opportunities, etc. But it starts with a very critical assumption that everybody begins from the same place, right? It's a really, really critical assumption. Now, it's a hard one for organizations to grapple with because we have often equated equality with fairness. It is a core value of this country in terms of how we are operated, that we should be operating an equal kind of basis. And because we've made historically this assumption, whether it's, false assumption really, that we're all starting from the same place. But it's important to note that that's the value. Equity does something different. While equality values equal inputs, equity values equal outputs, right? So, and it makes another critical assumption, that it assumes that everybody starts from different places in terms of history, experiences, opportunities, and resources. So in other words, very simplistically, if the goal is to get full, right, to no longer be hungry, I may give you 2 slices of pizza because you haven't eaten today. I may give you none because you're already full. I may give you 3 because you haven't eaten for 2 days, and I'm going to move along to kind of to support us getting to a final common outcome, right? So this has, again, all kinds of, in concept, simple. In practice, it can be really difficult to actually apply. So as we think about and begin to put together the ideas of equity, diversity, and inclusion as they all play together in an organization, what it requires us to do, if we want to think about my sister's experience, if we're thinking about it through an inclusion or equity lens, we would be asking about who made the decisions around what her education would look like. Were there multiple perspectives at the table deciding where to prioritize limited resources, where to target specific supports, or what to embed in curriculum? Did we use data to identify where there are disparities or use that data then to pull in those groups to help figure out what do you need to feel more engaged in the system? Do we value data? Do we have the resource to use data? All of that, equity inclusion begins to answer. Typically the answer in all of that is no. Whether we're in education, whether we're in rural Oregon or urban area or centers in Oregon, the decisions that organizations make are typically made by a very small group of people. We typically call them leadership teams or board of directors or executive teams or whatever we may call them. And they're often made in exclusion of the constituents that we serve. Oftentimes, organization leaders are making decisions about constituents that they've never had personal experience with, don't have a personal connection to the issues with. And so equity and inclusion challenges an organization to begin to rethink about how we operate and how we make decisions and how organizations are constituted and how they actually operate. It actually challenges the notion that time limits our ability to be more collective in our decision making. That our employees or constituents don't get the complexities of organization-wide decisions and therefore they can't be at the table. That it's not their role to actually have a say in how an organization operates. And on the generative side, it champions the perspective that making time to include staff or your constituents and creating spaces for folks to have a voice in how their organization operates actually creates a more empowered staff. That a more empowered staff becomes a more productive staff. It champions the idea that multiple perspectives helps bring in a level of creativity that is needed to navigate diverse issues and challenges that an organization faces. In an action-oriented, task-focused, efficiency-valued culture, equity ultimately requires us to slow down, to reflect on process, to ask ourselves, do we have the right people at the table? It pushes us to include historically excluded voices in decision-making. And it supports us in unearthing any unconscious bias that may be showing up personally or collectively in our process. I want to end here with just and then we'll move, with just some time to engage in some questions and answers in terms of how this applies. I do want to say that being in organizations again and again and again, I have heard countless leaders say two things to me as they engage this, no matter where they're at. We don't have the resource and we don't have the time to engage in this in a meaningful way. And we always say back, where you put your time and where your resource is where you show us where the priorities are. And what I've found time and time again is that organizations have figured out ways to do both. That through this process, they've committed to this idea that there might be something more here for their organization, that it may actually generate ideas and profit and the such in ways that they hadn't seen before. And to a person in an organization, I think you could ask any organization that we've invested in, they've given up significant amount of time invested in kind of rethinking how they do this, and they're not disappointed in the investment. I think they're finding that it pays off. I think it's finding that it's challenging them to lead in more inclusive ways, and they're finding themselves more personally fulfilled. They're hearing voices from more people in their organizations and getting contributions from folks in organizations that they hadn't had before. And most importantly, they're able to deliver on mission in a way that is more in integrity. And I think for all of us involved in that process, that is something that I think sits better with them than anything. So I just want to thank you for I just want to kind of frame a little bit of what this work is. Jim wanted to create some space for some time to kind of do some a couple questions, and then we'll kind of move forward. So I didn't know if there were any questions, and Jim also had thoughts if there weren't, just of kind of the full range of this, or just at least beginning conversation. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Hello, hello.
Am I on YouTube now? Okay, good. My name is Tim Rusk, Executive Director at Oregon Relief Nursery here in Central Oregon. And I guess I'm really wondering about the connection between equity and hiring practices. Mm-hmm. So we normally think we want to hire the best qualified, but that sort of assumes everyone comes from that equality concept. So really interested to hear kind of what your experience is with that.
I really appreciate that question. So when we're working with organizations, that is the probably number one question that people come to us with, which is help us figure out this HR thing and what goes on with this. And so it's a longer question, but let me just put it in short. One of the questions that we have to do when we think about diversity, and we say we typically hire the most qualified employee. As we begin to engage in this conversation, we start to ask ourselves what qualifies an employee, who makes those qualifications, right? And who is actually deciding in that process who meets that criteria, right? So when we think about how we hire, we actually think we have to pull back a second first and say, our goal, what are our actual goals in hiring? Is it simply to hire the most qualified candidate, right? Or can we expand on that? Can we say that the goal is not just simply to hire the most qualified candidate, the goal of our organization is to be reflective and representative of the community we serve. And we want to bring in high qualified candidates who do that, right? Even a simple switch on that. And by that, then we have to explore the question, what's the community we serve, right? Are we just speaking about race? Are we talking about sexual orientation? Are we talking about geography? Are we talking about gender? Are we talking, you name it. But it requires, again, introspection from the organization to say, okay, first, who is that? What is that community we serve, right? What is the goal? How do we talk about what is highly qualified? And by that, I'm not meaning, people oftentimes equate equity with enabling or lowering of expectations. And if there's one myth I'd hope I could debunk today, that is not what it is. right? To me, equity is about increasing expectations. It's about holding an organization to a higher standard, saying, yes, it is important that we hire high quality folks, highly qualified folks who represent the community we serve, and that's possible, right? And so part of that then means we have to rethink our entire process of how we hire, from what goes on job descriptions, to what we qualify as qualified, to how we vet resumes, to what we ask in interviews, to even how we ask people to show what they know in an interview setting. So we come under the assumption that everybody comes to an interview process even from the same place, right? And they're not coming in concerned about or worried about how their accent may impact their experience in that interview, and what just that worry does in an interview process, right? Or coming into an interview process and wondering where your gender may have impact and how people see you as professional or as a fit, or how well you can express yourself. So as an interview process, how do you create a space where it's the interview process is as inclusive as possible? And so you can really get at what people know, right? And what people have to contribute, right? And also give the person coming into the organization a sense of safety and belonging. For us, an inclusive organization starts with even what goes on in that job description, to how you first greet the person. So, and I just appreciate the question. So when we think about hiring process, it's like, this is a great example of something that is a simple idea that has layers and layers and layers and layers and touches all kinds of pieces of the organization. I'll say one other thing. When we talked about, in the organization I worked with 7 years, we had this thing, we wanted to be inclusive, representative of the community we serve. I had a person come up to me, a white woman come up to me and say, hey, I get what this means. It means that if I was hiring right now, more likely I would not get this job. It also is meaning that I can really expect that I'm not going to be able to advance in this organization, because if we want to be reflective of the community we serve, and I look at our executive leadership, it really reflects me. It doesn't, like all this kind of stuff. And so I realized in that conversation, like all the nuances of that, all the meaning making, and what it means to actually go out and engage our staff in the conversation as well. What does this actually mean? Does it actually mean that you don't have place or value here, that you can't find a way to move up in an organization? Is that, because it's not certainly what it meant for us, but because we did not communicate literally what it meant, it got interpreted that way, right? And where are the nuances? Where is it? Yes, we need more diverse representation, and so there may be times, right, where when we have a tie in qualifications and all that kind of stuff, that we may look for what pieces are we missing, what perspectives are we missing on our team. But that doesn't mean you don't hold value. It doesn't mean that there's a place for you to move up, all that kind of stuff. So all of that, I just say that it's like all of the nuances that go into just one kind of thing, but have really significant impact, right? So I know I'm not getting too in there, but I just appreciate the question. Mm-hmm. Here comes Mike.
Hi, I'm Seth Miller with the Oregon State Parks Foundation. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of intrigued by two comments you made. One about debunking myths, mm-hmm. and the other about starting with introspection. Seems like we can't really start this conversation until we have a greater understanding of the fabric of Oregon. And it seems to me that the myth that needs to be debunked is that we live in one of the whitest states in America. And I just hear that myth over and over and over, and I know it's not true. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how we debunk that myth and how we help people understand the variety of all the different people that make up the state.
I really appreciate the question. How do we answer that? So actually, this is actually when we talk about debunking myths and beliefs, we actually start with this conversation about how did we get to the space we're in, right? So it's important why we talk about why diversity matters, and we talk about what is diversity. I also think as a state, one of the things that we have to grapple with, that is the most difficult thing I think for us to grapple with, is the foundation from which this country was built on, and which the state was built on. And I encourage folks, there's a gentleman named Brian Stevenson who wrote a great book called Just Mercy. He has an amazing TED Talk. And I encourage folks to look at that. He talks in his TED Talk, and he said something that just opened my eyes. He said, when you go to Germany, they want you to go see the concentration camps. it's a present part of their culture. They understand that helping and deal with some of the most challenging aspects of their history helps and informs how they operate in the present. He talks about when they disbanded apartheid in South Africa, they couldn't just not talk about apartheid. They had to engage that conversation, right? Even in peace and reconciliation in Rwanda, there had to be conversation about the genocide that was going on there. In this particular country, and definitely in this particular state, as I work with educators all around, we have had a very challenging time talking about the foundation of this country. And part of that means there is an acknowledgement of the exclusionary nature that this country was built on. And it is a hard conversation for us to have. And in fact, what we've done is not just not had that conversation, we've actually rewritten it. So we won't actually talk about the attempted genocide of Native Americans. We actually rewrite it and we call it manifest destiny. We call things, we don't want to talk about the theft of land from Mexico, we want to call it a treaty. And that has very significant impacts. We want to say that Oregon's the whitest state in the country. We don't want to ask why. So we want to talk about the fact that as this country was celebrating the passing of the 14th Amendment, Oregon wasn't. That we were the last state to include African Americans in the country. That we have had a history of exclusion that has resulted in the current racial demographics of this country. That we're not just, it's just not, just didn't accidentally happen. That the founding of the state was, and this is not hyperbole, it is just fact, that the founding of this state included a narrative that had people from the south and the east of this country coming to Oregon as a more or less white utopia, where we would not have to, where folks would not have to deal with the people of color problem or the Native problem. There is a history of Oregon around race that we must address, and is part of why across every social indicator in this state, you name the indicator, we are going to find a racial disparity. I will say the lasting impacts of that, and I'll pair with how this intersects with other forms of diversity, is when I work with organizations, especially as they're doing statewide stuff, part of the conversation is, well, we're an all-white community. I don't know, there's other forms of diversity we need to be celebrating. Race isn't an issue here for us, one way or the other, right? It's like, I don't have Mexican students, I don't have this or that. I remember Chris Otis, who works on the board of SMART, has started making a reader today. She was working with her staff, and their staff were saying, well, we don't have a whole lot of kids of color, so when we think about diversifying our book selection, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. His initial conversation was, that, kids won't be excited about reading books from cultures different than them. It will actually turn them off from reading, all those kinds of things. And as staff began to unpack that narrative, they began to obviously see some of the inherent kind of gaps in that conversation that, hey, what are we perpetuating by continuing to create a single story experience for our white kids, right? Much less our kids of color. I want to know, and as I told folks as I was coming to Redmond today, I had 4 different people ask me if it was safe. 4 different people, 2 people who asked me multiple times if I would bring somebody with me. So whether whether we want to in this area feel like, is this safe, is this not safe, is it not? One of the legacies of exclusionary policy or practices is that we've created really segregated spaces around race, right? And there's lots of information and lots of fears going on. And do I walk? What does it mean for me not just to have the feel? If I don't want to have the feeling, what are communities doing to actually show inclusiveness? So that I have to see inclusion. I have to see that actually show for me to not kind of operate from a place of fear-based place. So on one hand, we can't, and I will say we cannot move equity without actually addressing some of that foundation. Right? And in doing that, what's really great when we actually do that work, what happens to us is if we can get to a place where we say, hey, look, there's a foundation here in this country that was really exclusionary. And I will not just say it was not just race. But at the time of the gender, sexual orientation, all of that at play, right? If we can acknowledge that the foundation of this country was exclusionary, as hard as that may be, and that we have been profiting off of that, or for folks of color have been colluding with that in lots of different ways, it's a hard conversation to have. But if we can get ourselves into the space of doing that, then we can then ask ourselves, if not this, then what? And if we can get ourselves into a then what conversation, if we are now in a really empowered space. Now we're talking about creating an inclusive environment. But we can't get there if we're denying this is happening, that we're built on a really exclusionary policy. It's built into how we operate as nonprofits. Why are we in the space where we're not including voices, all that kind of stuff? Because it's not the way we've been conditioned to operate. So on one hand, we really do have to address this legacy of, we have to ask ourselves, if we're so white, why? And what's the long-term impact? We also have to acknowledge all the various forms of diversity that show up and figure out how all of that intersects with all of this. How do we celebrate and acknowledge and honor the impact and role of all of the diverse perspectives, identities that show up in our organizations, in our communities, and how do we have that hold value in this? And so as we think about advancing equity, it isn't just a race initiative, right? We've got to think about a million different kinds of marginalized identities or communities or voices that aren't included at the table. We also, though, can't act as if race isn't significant here or that race isn't intersecting in all kinds of different ways in this way. So it's a complex, it's a hard conversation to have it. We have to learn how to be in it, all of that. We're finding with our organizations when we start with that conversation and expand into all other groups, it ends up being a really fruitful conversation for sure. So. Time for one last question, or are we done? You tell me. Okay, great. We've got one quick. I like that. A quick equity and inclusion question by Hanif. If this is on video, I just want that one thing. My staff will be laughing right now. That way, they're like, ah.
Well, the whole you're being afraid to come here has kind of stirred up my heart, and I guess it's a side subject that I'd love to talk to somebody about, but it sounds to me like the stereotyping from rural to city and from city to rural. But my question is, given that we have such a low population of diversity in this community, how do I attract good candidates of diverse backgrounds?
Oh, I love that. Let me do the quick answer on that because I'll try my very hardest to do quick, and I want to think about so. Let me do it in a different kind of context, but to answer the question. Education right now is, in our education system, it's 87% white. And that number fluctuates. It might be 90, somewhere in that ballpark, so 87 to 90-something% white. When I was at our last alternative school that I was working at, we paid 60%, at a certain point, we are paying 60% to our teachers of what they would get in the public school system, okay? So, in a system that is predominantly white, we're paying 60% on the dollar of what they could be, folks could be getting in a public school system, and we were serving a really diverse perspective, diverse constituency. So we were wondering the same question, and this is, I will say, not just a rural conversation. How we attract diverse folks into our organization is a conversation I have everywhere. It may be more pronounced in certain ways in places where there's less, but it's everywhere you go, given just that population is what it is. Our first starting part was not, it goes back actually to your initial conversation, was not how do we diversify the organization. It was how do we build a more inclusive organization. And we made a bet that if we build an organization that was inclusive, and we were thinking about what would it mean for more racially diverse folks to come into an organization? What does it mean to be more gender equitable? I mean, all that stuff, which actually more or less, as you enter in this conversation, there's nuances and there's a lot of the same tenets involved. Our bet was that if we built, the only way to do that, or actually the starting place to do that, was to build an inclusive organization first. And that through that, we could begin to slowly attract folks of color and their networks and would start pulling people in. We started with that when we opened our East Side School 2 years ago. We didn't have our building built. We were in a capital campaign. We were finishing up our capital campaign. We were located in a bigger public school, elementary school. In that public elementary school, there were 2 people of color on staff. We started with 6 people, 6 staff members. 5 of our staff members, teachers, were teachers of color. So one of the lessons that taught us, and how that happened, was we had how it started happening is we had one math teacher, African American math teacher, who actually was so moved by the environment we had that he actually turned down. He had a scholarship that would have paid for his college loans, but he had to work in the public school system to do that. He actually turned that away to come work at the school. Well, guess what? He talked to someone else. Our current language arts teacher came from Watts, California, who's Latina, who talked to a Latina in our program, in another program, and said, you got to come to this organization. It is so amazing. Like, da-da-da is going on. They're having conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion. You feel like you can be yourself, like it's not like da-da. And here we go, right? And so there's lots of strategies, and as we get into organizational work, there's all kinds of strategies to begin to how do we hire and how do we increase. But our belief is that like attracts like. And that the more we become inclusive, the more we're really committed to that, the more we're going to start attracting that to us. And I'll finally say, with SMART's a great example, that when Chris started thinking about this, she had a predominantly white organization. She had predominantly white volunteer base. Her first stop was like, okay, how do we think about being more inclusive as an organization? And then move from there, right? So I hope that begins at least to answering the question, or at least confirms your thinking early on, right? Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Well, I really appreciated the opportunity to cede almost all of my time to Hanif, because that was a far more important conversation than what I was going to give. So we'll just go ahead and skip my part. And my name's Jim White. I'm the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Association of Oregon. Welcome this morning, all of you. I'm glad to see so many of you come out bright and early on this beautiful day here in Central Oregon. I want to give you a quick report on the state of NAO, where we are as an organization, as well as some findings that we've recently had. Draw your attention to some things. So I'm going to refer to a couple of documents that we've made available to you. We have an annual report that everybody has here, and it's going to be online for those of you watching through YouTube. We also, I'll make reference to the other documents here in a minute. So as Chris Crank mentioned at the very beginning here, 2017 will mean that NAO and the organization that we grew out of, TAX, will actually celebrate our 40th anniversary. We're extremely excited about that, and that's also in conjunction with what will be the 100th anniversary of the 501c3 designation in the United States. So 1917 is when the original 501c3 designation happened. As Chris mentioned, we are growing stronger. You are NAO. We are a membership organization. We're growing stronger through our network of both our 501c3 nonprofits and through our affiliate members, through individuals, people from the government, people who are supporting nonprofits through their for-profit ventures. So we're very proud to see the growth of our organization, and we also are extremely excited to see that we are representing, we've made real strides in representing Oregon and growing our own capacity to reach out across the state. We're representing geographically the state in a new way, in a different way, taking on that statewide mandate that is NAO. We're especially appreciative of the support that we've gotten from the Ford Family Foundation through a special initiative to increase our rural membership. This is a challenge that I remember when I first came in, my very first annual meeting. Christy Stieber, where is she? Christy? You're out there somewhere? Yeah, she came up to me. She's like, what are you going to do about getting out there and representing and really getting into rural communities that are across Central Oregon? And I hope that in some small way we're really starting to make those strides. And we are building a very strong online presence. We just did a little bit of a reboot on our, sort of a transitional reboot on our website, and we've modified that, and we're going to continue to build resources there. We have seen an uptick in our website draw by nearly 22% over the last year, with a total of over 170,000 visits to the website to collect tools, to get resources, to learn about training opportunities, and whether those are NAO training opportunities or there are other organizations, WVDO, Center for Nonprofit Stewardship, lots of other, Center for Equity and Inclusion, other organizations out there that are helping our nonprofits thrive. We have a growing consulting program, and I really want to bring attention to this because I'm lucky here today to have a number of our consultants with us. We do organizational development consultancies. We've been building our associate model, our executive transitions model. We've got George Myers here, Ann Witzel, I think, is in the back there. Is Laura Fritz here? Laura, you here somewhere? We're excited about the work that we've done through our executive transition services. I mean, as an example, the story that Anne has been heading the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum for, the last year? So it's a little bit of a longer transition than we would like, but, an incredibly important institution here in Oregon and really in the nation. And Anne has played an amazing leadership role in helping them navigate some tricky waters over the last year. So that ability to be able to help organizations in their transition is an important role that we feel needs to be something we're playing along the way. Our consulting practice, we have partnered this year with Kaiser Permanente Northwest, and Kaiser learned through its ongoing grant making that smaller nonprofits and culturally specific nonprofits were struggling to find support for meaningful internal capacity building. In response, Kaiser asked to work with us to design a 2-year, $560,000 capacity building initiative. 14 organizations have been selected to receive $40,000 each over these 2 years for their capacity building projects. A couple examples of some of the organizations are the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, the Black Parenting Initiative, the Q Center, and the Salem Kaiser Coalition for Equity. Those cash awards to the organization are also going to be augmented by assessments and NAO consulting time as those organizations need and request. And NAO and Kaiser will convene this cohort of these 14 organizations 3 times during the 2-year grant period to encourage peer learning, relationship building, and mutual support. So we think that's also an exciting opportunity to continue to build our nonprofit sector here. We feel that we're partnering very effectively. This year we again partnered with our other 4 state associations here in the Northwest to produce the Northwest Nonprofit Capacity Report, and that's one of the other documents I'm going to refer to. It looks like this. There are copies for anyone who's interested outside, and I'm going to make some references to that here in a minute. But this is the document I'm talking about. We partner with Alaska, Montana, Idaho, and Washington to produce that report. We also are continuing to partner with a lot of our affiliate organizations, great sponsors and supporters, CFO selections in placing interim CFOs at organizations. We're developing a partnership with Mammoth HR, where we're co-developing content and new member benefits. We've got great partnerships with Heffernan, with Nonstop Insurance and Administration. So we're excited about these partnerships that help to bring more benefits to you as our members and nonprofits. Our training program is robust. We obviously here in Central Oregon, we have the nonprofit, the network of Central Oregon, but broadly across the state, we've done 159 trainings last year. Those are online, those are workshops, those are webinars, convenings. 51 of those were webinars, so anyone in the state can get a chance. And we've had people, John Day, Ontario, Rome. Anybody know where Rome, Oregon is? Yeah, couple? Okay, yeah. So we're excited to have that opportunity to serve the state in using technology as a means to get out there and give people the support they need. We as an organization are financially strong. We ended the year this year with we sustained a net positive for the 3rd year in a row. we are then able to put additional funds into our reserves and then also invest into bringing you more powerful services into the future. So I'm happy to say that as your membership organization, we remain financially viable, and we're trying to serve as a model and an example to all of you of what we think is important. And we are also committed to our values, as Chris referred to, as Jen referred to in Nancy's comments, and as Hanif just talked about. We are undertaking our own diversity, equity, and inclusion work internally as an organization. We've been working on this work ourselves for many years. We have been teaching it for many years, but we also recognize we need to continue to learn, to thrive, to figure out what can we do better and how can we change as an organization to meet the growing change of the population here in Oregon. I want to move just briefly to a couple of bits of information that came out of these two reports I'm going to refer to. The 2016 Northwest Nonprofit Capacity Report for the 5 states, and that was significantly supported by the Murdoch Foundation. And some highlights of that, if this will work, are, guess what? 19,000 501c3 organizations here in Oregon now. 19,250. We see that as an opportunity, I know the initial reaction is, that's too many nonprofits. Well, okay, so which one are you going to cut? Which passionate person are you going to tell, don't do that thing that brings joy or happiness in your community? Close that church. Remember, that includes churches. Don't help that particular community who may not have had a voice. Don't follow that passion in supporting the environment. I believe that rather than look at this as this is too many, what we need to do is think about how we grow the pie to support this level of care and love that Oregonians have for community. Those nonprofits have nearly $57 billion, or over $57 billion in assets. That's an incredible leveraging factor for our communities and for our government if we can partner correctly with government and with for-profits. More than 34% of Oregonians volunteer. That puts us up around 10th highest in volunteerism in America, in the country. More than a third of all Oregonians care that much that they're giving their time and oftentimes their resources as well, their personal wealth. The nonprofit we found in our study, and this gives you 3 years of information, but I continue to be concerned about the reserve levels of our nonprofits. Our nonprofits are not building their own sustainability. 47% report having less than 3 months of financial reserves. That's not a good thing. So that's something we need to continue to correct as nonprofits, and something we're helping to try to do through some of our work. Nonprofits describe their primary capacity needs as personnel, and yet nonprofits employ over 174,000 people in Oregon, comprising 12.8% of all private sector jobs. That's larger than manufacturing in Oregon. This is the 2014 Department of Labor information, and that's actually gone up because in 2013 it was only 12%. So we continue to grow as a sector in our employment. And so as Hanif was mentioning, if we're going to employ people, we need to be thinking about the way that we're employing them, the way we're attracting people into our organizations, and the way that we're retaining them. Hopefully we won't pay them only 60 cents on the dollar for what their public sector counterparts are making. I know I'm kind of, as I said, I ceded some of my time to make sure that Hanif could get as much of your questions answered as possible. But again, I want to make mention of some reports and some information here. So the other report I want to mention is this United for Charity report that just came out from Independent Sector. Fascinating report on the way that Americans value nonprofits, and particularly they zeroed in through a pollster and a focus group format on charities, how charities how voters care about charities and nonprofits. So 74% of voters trust charities with their money over the government. In fact, As you can probably imagine, that divides along political lines, so that is the conglomerate number. It pops up into the 80% for right-leaning folks, and it's about 68% for left-leaning folks. 78% of voters support a bigger role for the sector in working with government for solving problems and helping to unbind our arms and helping to take the tape off our mouths and getting us involved with policy issues. 88% of voters believe we should make it easier for people to deduct charitable deductions. That's pretty compelling. 88% say, look, we care about these organizations, make it easier for them, for us to take that charitable deduction. We are a strong believer in helping nonprofits both express their voice but also get out the vote. You've got to help people in your community express their voice. There is no restriction on you helping them to do that. And there's a great program through Nonprofit Vote. I encourage you to go onto their website, look up what they're doing, and get involved with engaging your community, your staff, and your volunteers. I also want to mention Oregonians Give, hashtag Oregonians Give. It's going to be on Giving Tuesday. Agnes Zach with WVDO has been leading this effort for a couple of years now. We've been in a support role helping to try and get out the word on what's happening with the opportunity that you have. You know, on November 29th, there'll be a free and easy way for you to raise awareness of your cause. All funds that are donated through hashtag Oregonians Give portal go to your organization. So there's no fee. You get 100% of the total that's given to you. We're looking forward to deepening our engagement in this as we go forward, and I appreciate Agnes's leadership on helping to continue to help grow the pie here in Oregon for our nonprofit sector. So with that, I'm going to cut off my time because I'm already toward the end of what should have been my time. But I wanted to, as I said, make sure that there's a pamphlet for the Oregonians Give. There's little flyers out there on how you can sign up for that. Our annual reports you all have, and that'll be online. And if you'd like to get a copy of the sector report, we have a bunch of copies. I don't know if we have one for everybody, but if you want those, that is also online, so you can get that online from us. So I'm going to ask Chris Crank to come back up here, and we're going to get into the next part of our program. Chris? Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. I'll do some speed talking now to keep us moving. We're really thrilled to be welcoming back many of our existing board members and also to welcome 4 new folks from across the state representing diverse sectors and interest areas. And as I call your name, I know all board members aren't here today, but as I call your name, please stand and remain standing, and then we'll clap for you at the end. I'd like to start with our new board members. And start with Celeste Hill Thomas. No, oh, okay. Now who started that applause? Jim? Next is Stephen Mark Baudois. He coached me last night, but obviously I didn't work. So thanks, Stephen. Kendra Morgan and Matthew Scott. So those are the 4 new members that were elected by the membership this year. So. Now, keep standing, and additional members of the board include Nancy Ramirez Arriaga, Ian Lombard, Kathy Collins, if you're here, stand, Marilyn Hartzog, Bob Lieberman, Michelle Neal, Chris Otis, Mac Pritchard, Jen Rusk, Brad Russell, Claire Sequin, and Brandy Tuck. So, thank you all. They're one of those 34% of volunteers in Oregon who make up that statistic. So, next I'd like to move on to acknowledging 3 NAO board members who will be leaving service this year, and all have served a long time on the board of directors. They include Ross Layburn, Eloise Damrosch, and Rick Nitti. And if you are here, will you please come join me on the podium? And I will talk about you as you come join me. Ross Layburn is former Assistant Attorney General with the Oregon Department of Justice, where he served for more than 30 years, including 20 years as the attorney in charge of the Oregon Charitable Activities Section. Ross is a past president of the National Association of State Charity Officials and served on NASCO's board of directors for over a decade. Locally, he has been a longtime member of the Giving Council of Oregon. Thank you, Ross. Eloise Damrosch. Is Eloise here?
She's not.
She's not. So I will talk about her on YouTube. Eloise has been with the Portland Tri-County Regional Arts and Culture Council, or RAC, since 1988 and has been the executive director since 2004. RAC is a $7 million organization that works to integrate arts and culture into all aspects of community life through grants to artists and artist organizations, placing specific works of art in public spaces and supporting arts education. So we will make sure and get her plaque to her, right? And last but not least, Rick Nitti has been the executive director of Neighborhood House since 1991, when he moved to Portland from Chicago. Did I say it right? Okay. Being a native Oregonian, I have an Oregon accent. Neighborhood House, founded in 1905, before the 501c3 designation was established, is a $5.6 million agency serving 12,000 low-income children, families, and seniors annually. Mr. Nitti is a former board president of Children First and board chair of Southwest Community Health Center. He currently serves as a treasurer of the board of the Hillside Farmers Market and is a member of the Multnomah County Poverty Advisory Committee. Rick was the co-chair of NAO Steering Committee when it was a program of tax and joined the board in January of 2010. He has served as president and secretary of the board and also on the finance committee. So thank you. Appreciate your service. So thanks to all of you for your service. Jim?
Thank you, Chris. So I'd like to just take a few moments to to both introduce some of our new staff and thank our existing staff. So I'm lucky enough to welcome this past year. We've had some great growth, and we have been lucky enough to add some amazing folks. And so I'd like our new staff, who most are here, few aren't, to stand for a minute. But Myra Camacho joins us as a program coordinator. Myra's not here, but she's watching on YouTube, so hi, Myra. Thank you. We also welcome our new senior consultants, Sarah Cruaz-Paez, Sarah, and Wenda Tai. Wenda. Victor Vasquez joins us as our Director of Consulting Services, Victor. And Victor's a native Oregonian from Hermiston. So he's been here for many years and just talks to me all the time about how much he loves Hermiston and that area. And he's just like, can't we do more out in Hermiston? And then Elizabeth Winterborn has joined us as our finance specialist, and Elizabeth is also watching on YouTube back at our office. Somebody had to make sure that we kept our work going elsewhere. So please join me in welcoming our new staff. And then I'd also like to thank all of our team members. The NAO team, we have 19 staff now. It's an amazing group. We have folks, we're beginning to actually have people out around the state. So Adrian Graham is out here in Central Oregon. Many of you know Adrian. I so much appreciate their day-to-day work and what they're doing for all of our nonprofit members and more broadly for the entire sector. So if you're one of the NAO staff, could you just stand up for a minute? Thank you. you. So that's all for me. Back to you, Chris.
Back and forth. We're coming to a close shortly here, but I did want to take the opportunity as the outgoing president of the board to take a brief moment to recognize a milestone for a special person in the organization. That would be Jim White. On October 8th, Jim White will have been with NAO for 4 years now. Jim has shown tremendous leadership in his role as executive director. He's helped transition our organization from a newly formed state association with 570 members to a strong state association with robust programming and 1,200, and maybe there are more, we didn't check with the office again, 1,281 was the last number we had. That's a 124% increase. The board is proud to work alongside Jim to help strengthen NAO and our offerings to the sector so that all nonprofits in Oregon can increase their capacity to deliver on their missions. I personally want to thank Jim for his mentorship, his leadership, and I'm excited to serve alongside you as your immediate past board president. So thanks, Jim, for all you do. Appreciate it.
So this is NAO ping pong, where we jump up back and forth. So I'm going to give you all the gift of time. So I would love, rather than me go and talk more about NAO, I'd rather that you all take a few minutes, talk to each other, network, get to know people that you may not have met before, get to welcome and know some of our new board members and staff, and make sure you get a chance to get yourself some coffee, tea, some drinks, some food out there. So thank you all. We're really excited about our coming year, and we're very excited to now kick off. So this is the end of our annual meeting and the kickoff of the High Desert Conference, which we have been very honored to be a part of and to work with our great NNCO Advisory Council here in Central Oregon to help put together. We think we have a great series of sessions coming up, including a lunch keynote panel with Ann Kubish, the CEO of the Ford Family Foundation, Doug Stamm, the CEO of the Meyer Memorial Trust, and Max Williams, the CEO of the Oregon Community Foundation. So I hope you'll continue to stay here with us for the rest of the day. I know it's beautiful outside, so don't run off to Smith Rock, okay, and go hiking. But stick around. There's some great sessions here, and thank you again for your support of NAO. Thank you.
I could probably even figure that one. Yeah, I am, so I have a chance of being on top of it.
The mic, I don't know if they've done anything, but you could remember it so it's mute or unmute.
Okay.
So you
Okay.
can test if it's on, if it's not, just put the right.
Okay. I mean, we're going to be spread out like this, you think?
If I was you, I would tell people.
Yeah,
I'm happy to help you.
You got it.
I think so. Okay. The only question I had for you was which sessions are streaming on
I don't know. I don't know which sessions are streaming. Jennifer or Amy?
There's 2 PDFs on the file.
I'm pretty sure this is
that'll help them know.
the keynote that's happening at noonish. That is streamed. Wherever that is. Is that here?
That's, I'm sure, in here. And then the question is, breakout sessions.
I think we wanted to try to stream those, but I don't know for sure. The other thing I know was the morning, which we already finished, and the keynote. And that was all that for sure. I'll find it.
Yeah, we cross paths on the So, yeah, we saw the slides. There were 2 PDFs on one side.
Those are for the although I'd like a copy of them. If they're not included,
There's a packet right here.
I did see some. And then the mic, if it's not making sound, the mute button is right underneath. And then the plenary.
I imagine we'll be working together quite a bit, then you do a lot of work in the
So since I can see this stuff right here, it helps.
Yeah, it does.
this year?
Yeah.
Oh, for care.
No, from the Banner Science Stations. Oh, okay.
I will introduce you if she says.
All right. Well, then we won't make it Friday. I wasn't sure about getting matched up with
That I would go to.
I just sort of, that was it, and I, you know, we're done. That was my position. I just kept jerking me around and insulting me, so I figured the hell with it. But, you know, she's tall, so
Start recruiting people. Which tables do you want them at?
well, if we could just get folks closer here, it would be helpful so that,
This is working. Okay. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, and Stan would love it if we cozied in a bit for the session. So if you can kind of come into these more central tables, that would be awesome. Fill them up, and then he'll be able to see and talk with you more easily.
you know, that nobody likes to move.
It helps. It makes such a difference.
Right. Yeah, I'd really like to be able to talk to people without the microphone if we could get there, but I don't think this room is going to be.
We'll see. We'll try it. And this session, you can see from the slide, this is strategic fundraising. So hopefully you're in the right place. It's with Stan Foster.